Chris Rostron, Head of Rugby League Cares. During these unprecedented times, we've been working closely with the RFL, the Rugby League World Cup and Super League to bring you the Rugby League United campaign. The campaign was designed to help the public in Rugby League to improve their general well-being and mental fitness during the lockdown. The campaign is funded by the mental health charity Mind, and we're asking all those that have had access to the support to provide us feedback through a completely anonymous survey online. The survey will only take you 2 minutes and it will provide us with the vital information we need to be able to continue to bring you these services absolutely free of charge. So, hopefully, you'll take part in the survey, which can be found via a link on the website below. So, to you, thanks for taking part in the campaign. We hope it's been of benefit to you all. But more importantly, thanks for supporting Rugby League and Rugby League Cares during these unprecedented times. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby League Cares Offload Stress and Coping Workshop. I'm Lee Jewett. I am an ex-professional Rugby League player, and we've got two legends of the game who are going to introduce themselves now. Lee.
Right, thanks a lot, Lee. Yeah, Lee Crooks here. Played over 500 first team games, played for Hull FC, Leeds and Castleford. Played a number of Great Britain internationals and was fortunate enough to play in a number of cup finals across the board. So looking forward to talking today.
And also we have Robbie.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Like Crooksy said and Lee said, former professional rugby league player, played Super League for Bradford Bulls, Salford Red Devils and Huddersfield Giants. Went on to play in the Championship also for Leeds Centurions. Former New Zealand International Rugby League player, and like the other two boys here, I'm also an ambassador for Rugby League Care. Back to you, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So we've got a few different stories and voices what you're going to hear throughout the stress and coping workshop. I'm going to start with a story on myself and how I experienced different stresses and potentially mental health issues what could have spiraled out of control, but I managed to have the right people around me and the right coping strategies to keep me on the right path, if you like. So I signed at Castleford in 2014, where we went on to play at Wembley, and then at the end of 2014 season, I had to have a hip operation, which did I know was going to keep me out for potentially 8 to 9 months. So during that time off, I was doing everything I could to get back. Obviously, the boys were already back out there playing in the league and Super League, and I was just sat in the stands watching them week in, week out, and it was having a telling effect that I'd never had so long out of the game, and it was challenging. It was challenging. Now, bear in mind where this story is going to go in the next 5 minutes is I'd like you just to think about your own stresses and coping strategy, and just see if you can pick out, where potentially I went wrong or where I went right. Because this is more of a positive story of where I went right, but along the way it was one hell of a journey. So then I got back playing in May of 2015 season, and when I come back playing in May, I was playing 2 or 3 games, and then in June my wife got rushed to hospital. She was pregnant with my twin boys, so she got rushed to hospital, and the local hospital couldn't facilitate us. They couldn't accommodate us because it was too early. They were 26 weeks. So we got sent to Burnley, which was about a 40-minute drive away from where we live, where the day after my wife had the twins. Now, I remember to this day, I sent a message out to the Castleford club, to the players, the coaches. The twins have arrived, everything's great, because I didn't know what was coming. Within 2 days of the twins being born, the doctors came to us and said, look, one of your twins needs to go to Liverpool to have an operation, and he needs to go now. So we had to make a decision to split the family. I had to go. I said I'd go to Liverpool with one of the twins. My wife stayed in Burnley with the other twin, and then in Wigan, I still had my other two children living in Wigan. We would get the family. So I went to Liverpool, and the operation went well. He came out of hospital, and then we have to stay at Liverpool. So I begged, I pleaded with the doctors, can we get my wife and my other twin to Liverpool as well, to just make it a little bit easier, because every morning I was waking up, I was going into Noah, my first twin, making sure he was okay, getting in my car. I was driving an hour and a half then to Burnley to check on my wife and the other twin, and then I would call to Wigan to see my other two children to make sure they was okay. And I was doing that on a daily basis because we thought needed to be done. Bear in mind, the season was still going at, obviously, the week in, week out. I weren't working. They were still playing week in, week out. And that side of my life had stopped. That was it. That had stopped. That had come to a standstill. So eventually we got my other twin and my wife to Liverpool, where we spent 4 months. And during that 4 months, I still think about it now. The 4 months was the hardest 4 months I've ever been through in my life. They went through I stopped counting at 20 blood transfusions, operations after operations. Some of the bowels were moved, and this is both twins. And then it hit me on one of the last operations when I had to sign the disclaimer to say, once I sign this disclaimer that I give permission, for the operation to go ahead, even if the worst outcome arises. And I signed it, and they pulled through. And I remember at the time, I felt so overwhelmed and stressed, but in my head, all I was saying is, I'm the man. I need to be here for, I'm the man of the house. I need to be here for my family. I have to stay strong. I can't kind of show that emotion too much. I've got to stand strong for everybody else. And yet it was eating away at me bit by bit. The stress were building, I couldn't believe how life was still going on. The world was still moving, but my life had stopped. That was it. My life was, all I knew was this hospital, these walls. We ended up moving into the hospital with my other two children. So we lived at the hospital at the time, and that was it. My world had stopped when everyone else seemed to just carry on as normal. And I couldn't get my head around how that was, how normality was still going on in life. And it seemed to just get worse and worse. And then one day, probably about 2 months in, I remember my wife, she said to the doctors, she said, do we take it day by day now? And they turned around and looked at us and said, no, listen, your lads are still critical. You need to take this second by second. And if you walk out with both lads, it's, I won't say a miracle, but they've fought every step of the way. And I was just like, wow, okay, so this is still serious. This is never ending. It just felt like it never ended. And then everything seemed to turn, even though the situations in the hospital were getting worse. My boys were getting poorlier and poorlier. Everyone else were coming under stress. The negative stress just seemed to disappear off me. And I don't know what it was. I was just reading a book to the twins one night when they were in the incubators, and I was just sat there beside them reading, and knowing they can't hear me. And I remember the nurses looking at me, and I was just sat there reading and just thinking, they'll be okay. They'll be okay. And it was just a turning point in my mentality. This will be okay. And I walked out in the corridor a couple of days later, and was parents upset, parents praying, and they weren't religious. They were just praying because they was in the same situation as us. And one of the dads came to me one day and said, Lee, how are you doing this? I said, what do you mean? He said, how are you doing this? How are you still here? Because we was one of the longer families to have been there. And I said, hope. I said, as soon as you give up hope, what you give up? I said, don't give up. I said, and he said, yeah, but my lads are poorly as well, and I can't do this. don't know what to do. How are you doing this? Really, how are you doing it? And it got me thinking, and I just thought, I didn't lose hope. That was the key. I didn't lose hope, but also I dealt with the stress of my life from 4 months ago was getting myself back to playing, to now sitting in a hospital with my family, not knowing if my children was going to pull through. And the more and more I think about that, if I didn't have the right sources around me, which we're going to get into through this workshop, if I didn't have the right sources around me and the right coping strategies, I honestly believe that could have ended a whole lot different for myself, because I would not have known how to cope, and it would have bubbled and bubbled and bubbled away at me. But even to this day now, how I found the coping strategies and how I relieved that stress, and it would just it just put me in a position of, well, this is the unknown. I couldn't control what was going on. I couldn't control anything. All I could control was myself and my family. You know, my wife and my 2 children. What was going on with my other 2? If they need an operation, that was out of my control. So we focused on what we could control, and then appreciation and gratitude. And I honestly believe there was the key pillars for relieving the stress through such an event. What could have been a lot worse, because my twins are here now, so we did come on. But it just wanted a bit of an insight into, obviously now you've heard the story of, if there's anything there that you was thinking, actually you probably could have done this and this and this, then you know it's about us learning and developing and how to deal with stress and cope with stress, because everybody has a different environment, everyone's from a different background, and everyone handles things a little bit different to others. So that's just a little bit on myself. During the workshop, we're gonna touch on understanding stress, good and bad coping strategies, understanding how to filter stress, and we're going to hear from, you know, the experiences that Lee Crooks and Robbie Hunter-Paul have done throughout their lives and their careers, and they're going to give you a bit of a story to themselves as well. So we come to what is stress. So as you can see, there's 4 main areas we've identified here. There are possibly a few more, but these are the 4 what stick out. So stress, danger. Stress is the body's response when it's in danger. We all experience stress. We need it to function. We need it to get better. We do need stress. Mental health, if unaddressed, stress can cause mental health issues like depression and anxiety, but it also can have, as well as have a negative effect on your mental health, it can also have a big impact on your physical health. Problem, stress. When stress interferes with your lives, it becomes a problem. Too much stress for too long can make us mentally and physically ill. And 1 in 6 British workers will experience depression, anxiety, or stress-related issues. So throughout working life, you know, 1 in 6 are going to experience some form of stress or some form of positive or negative stress. Now, I'm going to hand over to Lee Crooks, who's going to speak a little bit about himself and a little bit about stress and what he feels is stress, negative and positive. Lee?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lee. Unlike Lee and Robbie, my story goes back. I'm a lot older than them as well, so my story goes back quite a long while. One of the first things when I look back on my career, one of the first things that really springs out to me was when I was about 13, and I was brought up in a world and an era that speaking about your emotions and was a sign of weakness, and obviously when adversity, you know, pops its ugly head up, if you didn't wrap it around you, if you didn't just keep it inside and didn't try and overcome it, then that was a sign of weakness. And obviously the story that I'm going to tell you now is, it starts when I was 13. I just started high school in Hull. I my mum and dad used to had full-time jobs, and so as well as me going to school, before I went to school, I had to look after my little brother, make sure he got to school. When I got home from school, I used to have to make sure that he'd got his tea and everything else there. And then on certain days, I'd go off and go training with my amateur team, and then on another particular day, I would have to go to the other side of Hull to go training with City Boys, Hull City Boys. So so my life was fairly hectic. There's a bit of spare time that I did have. I spent playing outside with kids that were quite a bit older than me, 2 and 3 years older than me, and I was brought up in that environment. So obviously there were times where I got myself into a bit of trouble, and not massive things, but certainly enough to warrant the local Bobby coming around and talking to my mum and dad a couple of times. Going on from there, so this continued for a couple of years, and then when I was 15, I met my first girlfriend. She was a sister of one of the lads in my local amateur team, and she was older than me. And again, I was hanging around or being with people in a lot older age group than me. So again, and this carried on. I signed on when I was 17. September 1980, I was 17. I signed on that particular year, and then going from there, 2 months later, I made my debut for Hull FC. And that year, I played 8 games in total, as well as getting married to Janet at 17. So you can imagine that there was an awful lot of pressure, both on myself and then obviously getting married, setting up a household at 17, and obviously I had some situations where I struggled a little bit, but didn't know I was struggling, to be honest, and my career continued, and it continued, and by the time I was 21, I'd probably played over 120 first team games. I'd played in, I'd made my debut, for Great Britain, as a 19-year-old in 1982. I went on tour in 1984. I played in 3 Wembley finals, and I also played in 3 Yorkshire Cup finals, as well as a Premiership final and a John Player final. And obviously you can imagine sort of the peer pressure that was on me at the time. I also captained Hull FC, and I also had 2 kids as well by that time. So there was a lot of things going on in my life, and the one thing that stuck with me was that I was brought up with older kids all the time. So things that I didn't do was I didn't hang around with kids my own age very much, apart from when I trained. When I look back at that time, I didn't realise that there were issues going on that now people would pick up very, very easily. So for me, I just thought it was a norm. I used to do things that during that time that I probably shouldn't have done. A lot of that was based around alcohol. And it's only now that, and one of the reasons why I wanted to become an ambassador for Rugby League Cares and for Ahead of the Game, is because looking back at what I did and what I should have done are completely different, and it's only now that I think to myself,
if I'd have done this, or even if I'd talked to somebody. I never talked to anybody because everybody deemed it to be a weakness. So I had to bottle everything up. So as I say, things were a lot different then than they are now. And as Lee says, if you try and put yourself in my place, and that, what do you think you could have done that would have alleviated some of that stress? What I did was I went to the pub and got drunk. Not all the time, but I'd like very, very fortunate that I was playing for a good team and I played well, and I had it was probably the culture of that particular time. So going to the pub and having a beer after training and that was the culture. So, and nobody ever mentioned anything. Nobody sort of said, "Oh, are you drinking too much? Are you doing this?" So again, it's, I just think to myself now, these things that I could have done that could have alleviated a lot of the problems that I had then, and certainly going forward, I'm not going to tell the rest of my career because I'll be here forever and a day. But I had some similar issues when I went to Leeds. And then the first time that I ever felt a bit of freedom was when I signed for Castleford, and I spoke to Darryl van der Velde, who was the coach at the time. And he basically sat me down and just said, "Look, you've got a girlfriend." By the time I'd split up, by the time I was 23, I'd split up. So from my first wife, so I started seeing somebody else. And then when I signed for Castleford, we had a daughter, and he basically said to me, "Sit down, concentrate on your private life, concentrate on your daughter, concentrate on everything else that you think you need to concentrate on, and forget about rugby, because the rugby will take care of itself." And that was one memory of one person that spoke to me in so simplistic terms about how I could alleviate a lot of the pressure and a lot of the stress that I was under. And I just think back and think, well, if he'd have been around back in the day, then I think things may well have been a little bit different. But that's just a short, brief, hopefully, insight into some of the things I've done and shouldn't have done. But rugby is quite a stressful game at times, but life in general now is fairly stressful as well. So hopefully we can point everybody in the right direction. Thanks a lot. Lee, back to you.
Great, cheers, Lee. So sources of stress. So with stress, people tend to look at it as it's only in negative situations, when actually it can be in positive situations as well, and life-changing events. So even happy events can cause stress to our lives. But when things go unaddressed for so long, stress can trigger mental and physical health issues. So I'm just going to talk through five key life-changing events, if you like, what most people go through, and how, if you've already gone through them, how, if you ever think about how it's affected you already, or hasn't affected you, or you think it's going to affect you, you might find a little answer into that, and it might help you improve when you do come to these life-changing events. So life changes: leaving home, getting married, having children, relationship breakdowns, health scares or physical illness, accidents or bereavements, legal issues, arrest or imprisonment. We have emotional, and this is a big one. I personally think, and exactly what Lee's just spoke about, is peer pressure, conflicting cultural values and beliefs, coping and uncertainty. Physical, late nights, lack of routine, poor diet, misuse of alcohol or drugs. Environmental, poor housing or accommodation problems, social isolation, unemployment, adjusting, to whether you're moving house or you're going to move country or you're traveling, financial pressures and changes at work, starting a new job, coping with an increased workload or promotion, poor relationships with colleagues or managers, or the fear of redundancy. Now, all them, majority of them do happen within people's lives. At least one of them will happen, and it's just having the capabilities and the coping strategies to deal with them when they arise. And I'd just like to kind of tap into Lee's story a little bit. And Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, but the big thing what stuck out to me, you mentioned peer pressure. You couldn't speak about emotions because of back then it was deemed as a weakness. But now how much times have changed, and actually it's a strength to speak about your emotions and to have that, to know that you've got a support network in place, especially whether it's colleagues at work or it's your teammates, it's school friends, it's your parents, anybody around you, and it's deemed as a strength now, which it is a strength, because if you can speak about your emotions and you can speak about what life's throwing at you, you become a stronger person, definitely. And I think Lee hit it on the head when he spoke about he felt like he couldn't speak about that because he would be deemed as a weakness. Now, he also was a front rower, so if you think of rugby league terms, that person's supposed to be this big hard man, if you like, who doesn't show much because he dominates on the field. That's him. But yet, what they don't understand is how much that can take. That can put a stigma on that to a certain extent of, well, actually, we're human beings and we all need to speak. No matter what your role is in work, in life, you've still got to speak, and you've still got to have the emotional intelligence to speak and relieve stress. So, Lee, is there anything you want to add off your story into the source of stress there?
Yeah, I think that obviously as a young lad, being married, so not only peer pressure was a massive thing, but getting married at such a young age as well was probably put twice as much pressure on me. I didn't knock her because I knocked around with older people all the time. I didn't sort of get to enjoy my teenage years, if that makes sense. So, from the age of 13 through to 17, I didn't get to enjoy any of my teenage years. And I think that some of the problems I had was because of that. The other thing as well is, not being able to talk, not talking to people. As I say, when I spoke to Darryl, it was like somebody had lifted a big weight off my shoulders when I spoke to Darryl about some of the issues that that were stopping me from being the player I could be, and obviously his feedback to me about making sure that I looked after myself first and foremost, and then think about rugby. That was a massive thing for me to be able to hear, and I think that if something like that, as I said earlier, if something like that had been, or somebody had spoke to me like that earlier in my career, then I think some of the things may well have been a little bit different. But don't be frightened. And you're right. It's talking to people is a strength. And I've been very sort of bolshy over quite a few years now about mental health. But it's only now that I understand the effects that things can have. And when I look back at my career, I've been in situations that players have been in now, and it. I think I would, if I knew now that I knew then what I knew now, then I'm sure I'd have made some different life choices and some different things going on, and I would have spoke a lot more about the issues that were bugging me at the time.
The main point of this is stress is everywhere. Sometimes we welcome it, sometimes it creeps up on us, but it's there. It's in life, whether it's negative stress or positive stress, it's there. But it's just being mindful and being aware that it's there, and having the coping strategies, which we'll get into as we move on now. So as you can see, the stress container or the stress bucket. Now, if you have a look at, if you can see the container, the bucket, on one side, there is a tap here. Imagine there's a tap there, and obviously on the top, it's where it can overflow. So the key to the stress container, and the reason we use this is, if you've got the tap switched off, it's going to overflow. Like you're going to overflow. There's a term we use in life of flip your lid. It's going to take too much. You're going to flip your lid. It's going to overflow. But if you've got the tap, or you've got the coping strategies in place, and you know how to handle the stress, and your tap's just turned on, it'll never overflow. You get them. They'll come in, they'll come out. You know the different stresses. You'll understand them. They'll come into the bucket. You'll feel them. You'll admire them to a certain extent, and then they'll go. They'll disappear. And then the day after, they'll come and they'll go. And it's a bit of a conveyor belt. But we use the stress bucket because it shows a really good example of how to deal with stress. And the main concept of the stress bucket is having the coping strategies. Keep your tap turned on. But as we move through the slides, we're gonna show you a little bit more on the stress container, and also we're going to bring Robbie onto Paulie now to speak a little bit on himself.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. So first and foremost, we understand that the stress bucket isn't an infinite space. It is something that is finite, and we can only put so much in before it starts to overflow and absolutely goes everywhere. Well, that happened to me in 2016. Now, in life, we know that we're going to get blindsided by things, and stresses will come and stresses will go. And, you know, for the most part, most of us will be able to deal with those stresses when they do come along. But sometimes you can get blindsided, and it isn't just a stressor. It actually ends up being a bit of an avalanche. Now, different things have different weights to different people. So I thought I'd just share with you my little story on actually how my stress bucket overflowed. So 2016, I finished playing in 2011. So I'm 5 years out of the game. Still at that point, I'm still trying to understand my own pure identity of what I am now post rugby league career. Because as a rugby league player, I knew exactly what I was. I got told where to turn up, what to wear, and what time to be there, and what foods to eat. I knew my identity. When I come out of the game, I had to discover myself. So in that period, over probably what has been the last 9 to 10 years, I've been working on that element of myself personally. 2016, I find myself as CEO at the Bradford Bulls, a job that I had a lot of pride with, because I spent 13 glorious years at that club, where we picked up 3 World Club Championships, 4 Super League rings, 2 Challenge Cup titles, and I think 5 or 6 Challenge Cup matches, making the finals themselves. So a really illustrious career that I was blessed by playing around such amazing athletes that got me the opportunity to experience that with them. So going back in the role of an administrator, sports administrator, you can imagine I did that with so much passion and so much love in my heart and goodwill. It's an interesting aspect because I joined the club in 1994. I grew up with a lot of the supporters. In 1996, the advent of the Super League, the Bradford Bulls, who were Bradford Northern, embraced the Super League and what they created, the match day experience, engaged with children and families. So our crowds went from 3,000 to 12,000. Those kids that come along at that time, they stayed with the club for the next 10 to 15, 20 years, and they're the supporters still there now. So as a kid myself, at 18 years of age, I grew up with them. So I knew so many faces. You know, we had thousands on the terraces, but over the 20 years that I had been there before I started becoming a sports administrator, I knew them. I knew them personally. I knew a lot of them personally. So there was that added amount of pressure to make sure that I could do as good a job as possible when I was a sports administrator. But what happens? We get to that point in the season where actually there's no more funds in the bank. The business model was wrong. They didn't have enough. The crowds, audience sizes, they had missed forecasts on that, and there just wasn't enough money in the bank The board had disappeared. Everybody that was still a part of the board were overseas, and even though I had CEO as a title, I didn't actually have the autonomy to actually make change in that respect. So that was, you know, I basically went through this one period where it was about four to five, maybe 6 weeks long, because that was happening at work professionally. So I had staff turning up, obviously wanting their wages. I didn't have the autonomy to do anything with the accounts department. So there wasn't really anything I could do other than sit there and apologize on behalf of the club. What was also going on in my private life, what a lot of people didn't know, was that the mother of my two daughters, my oldest two daughters, Aisha and Mia, she had been recently diagnosed with terminal cancer. So she was, and when she was diagnosed with that, she went south really, really quickly. So my oldest daughter, Aisha, lives in New Zealand. She came over 2 weeks before her mother passed away. My second oldest daughter, Mia, she was already living with me. So I had both my my children in the house. They were, you know, they were having to deal with their mother's impending death. So as a father, you know, my job is to protect my children. That's the only thing that I could say, was just to try and be there for them, make sure them professionally I'm going to work, and as a sort of figurehead for the club, my job is to try and protect the staff, protect the club itself as well. Another layer to that was that we had just recently had the birth of my youngest daughter, Emily. And so I'm trying to be there supportive for my wife as her hormones are going all over the place. One of the things that I didn't really consider, because when me and the girl's mum separated, we didn't separate on bad terms. We got together when we were children. Over the next 15 years, our lives just grew apart, and so we were very good friends. It was almost like we were a brother and a sister, love and hate at the same time. But what I was not really thinking about, or not really understanding, was I was going through that mourning process myself. So 2 weeks after my oldest daughter arrives, you know, some really confusing times during the 2 weeks. Tony passed away, and then there was the mourning of her passing, and all at the same time. I've got this moving thing called the club, and what's going on with the club, and professionally, and people wanting answers, and the media wanting answers, and my stress bucket, who I believe that I was a very resilient person. What happens when you get into times like that where it hits you, your stress bucket actually starts to contract, and it becomes smaller and smaller while you're pouring more and more into the top. And as I was trying to be strong and deal with it on a personal basis, I was coming apart. I'd been down to see the doctor. I'd asked him what can I have, just to sort of like keep, you know, what did he have that could help with this massive amount of emotions that are going on inside my head. Can't sleep. I can't see the wood for the trees, so to speak. I was just in it. I was literally just in the moment, and I couldn't really see what was happening to me. And my wife and a good friend of mine pulled me aside, and they said, you need to start looking at yourself. And the point that I'm trying to make is that life happens sometimes. At that moment in time, which happened in a very short amount of time, I just got this incredible layer cake of stress, depression, expectation, just come overwhelmingly into my stress bucket. I didn't have a way of turning on the tap, as Lee described. My tap, the tap had basically fallen off the bucket, and it was just overflowing. And ultimately, I was doing negative coping strategies. I turned to the doctors asking for medication and stuff. And don't get me wrong, medication is good, but it's just not me. Alcohol, like Crooksy was saying earlier, trying to deal with the pressure of everything using negative coping strategies. And I'll come back a little bit later on and explain the rest of my story, but I think this is a brilliant little segue. So back to you, into negative coping strategies. So back to you, Lee Jewett, to carry on with the program.
Cheers, Robbie. So as you can see with a bucket, and this relates to what we were just speaking about with the vulnerability, vulnerability determines the size of your bucket as well, and everybody's different. Everybody's got different experiences, which you've heard 3 different stories here. Everyone's got different experiences, different support mechanisms, different social environments, and it's about how we deal with them and having the right things in place to deal with them. So moving on to negative coping strategies, which Robbie and Lee have spoke about a little bit. So if you have a look, obviously at the screen, there's 5 what we think are probably what key in society a little bit more than others. So the first one, we've got overdoing it. Whether that's sugar, caffeine, alcohol, because they're all quick fix. So you might feel good doing it, but at some point when you stop, you've not overcome anything. Then stress is still going to be there. They're going to come flowing back, and they're still going to be there and sitting with you, and you're still going to have to deal with them again. You've also got chasing perfection. Nobody's perfect. People want to keep getting better and keep growing, but yet we still see that these perfect role models, if you like, how much we want to be like them, but yet it's not chasing them, it's chasing yourself and your own identity and create, everyone's unique, and it's creating yourself and accepting that mistakes will happen. It's just about how we overcome them. Overworking, so whether that's checking your emails out of hours and just being glued to work constantly, and not taking your time away to unwind and relax. Bottling up your feelings, which Leah spoke about, back in the day when that's what he felt you had to do, or that was the culture then you had to do. But actually that makes things worse. As Robbie's just said, your bucket will overflow because you're just keeping them and there's no tap. The tap's full off. There's nothing coming out of the bucket. It's just everything's coming in. And spending too much time in front of a screen. So, that's just being pressured into doing something constantly. Well, actually, and I like to use the term, take time offline. Bring yourself away. Bring yourself offline for a little bit and just appreciate and admire, a few things what you don't usually admire. And so these are negative coping strategies what seem to stick out, in society a little bit more. And obviously this doesn't help your bucket. This doesn't help yourself. It'll just keep yourself overflowing. So we're going to move on to positive coping strategy, where straight away I'm going to hand over to Robbie, who's going to talk you through this slide and a little bit more on himself.
All right, thanks, Lee. So yeah, as we were just describing, those negative coping strategies, like I said, grabbing the drink, looking for medication, overcooking it, definitely anything that would change my mindset was definitely it. I was going into work too much. I couldn't come away from my family for obvious reasons. But one thing I could put down was the work, and then I decided to take a compassionate leave from the job, and then realize actually that was a big part of the problem that was pouring that, that expectation, trying that like you were just saying, Lee, searching for perfection. It's a big problem for being an athlete, because obviously we all feel the same thing. We're always looking for the next best thing, to how we can get better and better. And I was probably, again, just asking too much from myself. So what I did, I stepped away from the job. I contacted Sporting Chance, sat down with Colin Bland, and I voluntarily put my hand up, and then went into 6 weeks of counselling, where I was just able to start working through my grief, working through, because it wasn't just that I was grieving the passing of someone that was really close to me. I was also grieving leaving the club, and to a certain extent leaving the game at that sort of intimate level. So I had to work through that, and then just line things up. And then I then started talking to Rugby League Cares, which is how I became an ambassador for them. And they were running the offload program. It was in its infancy at that point in time, but I really liked a lot of what they were teaching the communities. And so I started getting more and more involved with them. Then they also put me on some mental first aid training, suicide prevention training, and a number of other, and directed towards resilience training, and all a whole myriad of different types of tools to make me psychologically stronger. Physically, I've always been a very strong person. You know, especially for my size, only a little bloke, but I can throw a lot of weights around in the gym. It was one of my unique selling points, I guess, as an athlete, is I could pull myself out of tackles, and you know, I was able to hold my own, even though I was a little bloke in a big fella's sport. But psychologically, I had never really taken it to the extent of being a psychologically strong athlete. I was always just thought that I naturally was. And I also, like a lot of people, believe that your lot in life, the way you're wired mentally, is just, it has to be that way. And you're either resilient or you're not. Well, that's not true. As you guys all know, the more training, the more tools, the more activities you can do to strengthen your mental health and well-being, your mental fitness, as we like to call it, the stronger you will get. So my positive coping strategies, one of the first things I learned was the 5 ways to well-being. So I've given my life over to it. So I mentioned it before, becoming an ambassador for Rugby League Cares. So that's the element of giving, that there's giving, learning, exercising, being mindful, and connecting with people. So giving has been a really important one, because the more I've given to Rugby League Cares, the more I've got back. Learning, we were talking about it before we come on air. I've been learning how to play the ukulele, reading sheet music. So trying something that's not just, because I learn a lot with my profession but it's, you got to separate the two. The learning that I think that we're talking about here is the thing that becomes food for your soul. Something for me is creativity. So as you can see, I've got paintings behind me. I love art, but also, you know, music is I think something that everyone can engage with, and I've got a horrible singing voice, so I decided to pick up an instrument. Exercise just being commonplace for me. I exercise 6 days a week. If I stop exercising, I get angsty and angry. So those are your 3 ways. Mindfulness, as you can see, I'm wearing my meditation beads. I meditate minimum 30 minutes a day, and most days it's about 40 to 50 minutes, with 2 minimum meditations, one when I wake up and one when I put the kids to bed at night. But I will often do another 10 to 15 minute meditation in the middle of my working day, just to recharge my batteries, and I found it really brilliant. So being mindful, being present, also trying to be less time being anxious of what's about to come, or, you know, stressing about what I've done before in the past. So just being present and connecting. So over the course of the last couple of years, I've been connecting once again, utilizing social media and the tools that we have to connect with friends. So I'm not talking about looking at what they're doing on the timelines. I'm actually talking about conversations in WhatsApp groups. I'm talking about you know, now that we have all these brilliant technologies, being able to re-engage with my mates, have a beer, watch some of the rugby. I got to admit, when we're watching the NRL, it's hard to have a beer at 8 o'clock in the morning, so I don't do that. But, you know, have a coffee while they're having a beer, and it's 8 o'clock at night while we're watching New Zealand Warriors play. Bit of a long-suffering New Zealand Warriors fan at the moment. We'll get back there. So the 5 ways to well-being, you know, as you can see from the positive coping strategies there, get moving, setting time aside. So that comes with the sort of like being mindful, checking in on how you're feeling. That's something that I needed to do. So I do that through my meditation as well. The first thing I do is I sit down and I just have a real hard, long think about what's going on internally. And then I use breathing exercises to bring me back to zero. Learning a new skill, we've already spoken about, and just switching off, again, one of those mindfulness, being able to just be present, stay in the moment. And I did that. The sad thing about it, though, is that I had to go through an avalanche of stress and make my, you know, have a contracted stress bucket without learning the skills of being able to turn on the tap. And I'm giving myself over now to embracing the 5 ways to well-being, and constantly have that tap where I can turn it on and open it up into full pump if I really need it to. So cheers, back to you, Lee.
Cheers, Robbie. So yeah, as Robbie just stated, obviously what works for him might not work for somebody else. That's what we've got to bear in mind. But we can take, without trying, and we'll never know. So sometimes it's about trying new things, and that's learning a new skill. Whether it's, you don't set time aside for yourself, and then you start to, that's learning a new skill. So technically you're getting 2 of them in there. You're doing 2 without even knowing it. So yeah, cheers, Robbie. And the mindfulness as well, which I've started to do. It's just about appreciation and gratitude and the present of what you've got in your life, and what you can control within your life at the moment. And they're coming with your positive coping strategy, and they do turn the tap on, and the stresses just seem to just drift away. And you know what? Sometimes you might, after meditating or your mindfulness sessions, them stresses still might be there, but you know how to deal with them. So if it's taking another 5 minutes out during the day, that's brilliant. But no, fantastic. So we just got a video which is going to highlight the stress bucket and give you a bit more of an animation of how it works and what it's about.
What is stress? It's the physical and the mental changes we experience as a result of the demands placed on us in day-to-day life. So what does a bucket have to do with stress? The stress bucket represents our capacity to cope with stress, and the water level is the stress load. The more demands or stresses there are in our life, the higher the water level, and we feel stressed. Let's look at the different types of stress. There are the stressors that we choose, such as moving house, starting a new job, or going on holiday. And while mostly a source of joy and comfort, family, friends, and relationships can also place us under stress. Work stress is a common problem and can include workload, flexibility, and personal relationships in the workplace. And we all understand the financial demands of having a mortgage, bills to pay, and family to support. We can also get stressed from our environment, including what we see in the media, our neighbours, and even the weather. Plus, sometimes we hold attitudes and make lifestyle choices that add to our stress. And when the demands or stressors become too much, the bucket overflows and we can't cope. There are, however, ways to make sure your stress bucket doesn't overflow. You can reduce the amount of stress in your bucket by making choices, problem solving, or asking for support. And you can grow the size of your bucket by building your resilience and skills level in coping with stress. Remember, your thoughts, body, and feelings are all connected. So if you go for a walk or visit a friend, even when you don't really feel like it, you may end up feeling better able to manage. But be aware, some short-term fixes to stress really make it much harder in the long run.
Yeah, so just recapping on the stress bucket there from the video, exactly what we've all spoken about during our stories, and especially with Robbie's when he said about he thought he had a fairly big stress bucket at times, but yeah, it seemed to just get smaller and smaller. But yeah, there was so much coming in, so much water pouring in, so much stress pouring in. So it's just about how to deal with it, not taking the short-term fix just to feel good for, whether it's an hour, a night out with minutes, it's still going to be there or the day after. It's about using the coping strategies and having a look at what works for you, definitely what works for you, and how you can move forward, or you can help somebody else move forward. So we just to the recap and the team talk, which states for the four main session. Everybody has stress. It is just how we cope with it, which determines whether it's a positive or negative stress, what's going to impact on our lives. Vulnerability, in the size of the stress container. Having many positive coping strategies can help us regulate our stress container. And it's important to know how to identify when our stress container is full or overflowing, and when to use the coping strategies. That's the key to that last explanation. So we're just gonna, during the three of us, we've spoken, and we've all either come up or these quotes for quite a while. they mean something to us all individually. So I'm just going to hand over to Lee, because this is Lee's and he'll talk you through and give you an explanation on his quote. Lee?
Yeah, I think that obviously, you know, as I spoke about earlier on, and, you know, the story going from when I was 13 all the way through to, you know, round about 23, 24 is, you know, not to be frightened to ask for help. And the quote, you know, the quote for me, as it says there, is, you know, I ask for help not because I am weak, but because I want to remain strong. And I think Robbie's story epitomised a lot of that. And I think all our stories epitomised it, because, you know, back in the day when it was deemed to be weak to talk about things, is now is the total opposite. And I think that, you know, the more you seek help, the more you ask for help, the more you talk about your experiences, the better life-wise I think you're going to be.
Yeah, so this one's mine, and during my story and probably the last 10 years, you know, it's something what cropped up, and it's self-care isn't selfish. So a lot of people think by taking care of themselves, they're being selfish, you know, whether it's to a family member or somebody else, that they're being selfish because they're looking after number one. But what from my story and what I went through during my career at times as well, but within the hospital, the walls of the hospital, was if I wasn't looking after myself and keeping myself in the best possible frame of mind, you know, physically and mentally, how possibly could I have been there for my family? How possibly could I have been there for my twins day in, day out? It couldn't have happened, because at some point my stress bucket would have overflowed. So I had to look after myself before I could look after others. But then by looking after myself, the others, you know, my other family members, my children, they got the best because I was at my best to give them the best. And that's a quote what I like. I think is relevant, especially with this day and age of look after yourself, and then whether someone, you know, you've got adversity coming, adversity in your family, you know, or you know, within working life, within life, that if you're in the best possible frame of mind, then you will find a positive outcome, and you can guide people that way. Yeah, William.
Thank you. And this final one, obviously, is from myself. Remember to take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. And it's kind of reinforcing what Lee Jewett's saying there, purely and simply, is because you've got to put number one first. We need to, your lot in life, doesn't have to be just as it is. There's 1,000,001 ways in which we can reinforce our own resilience. We can make our buckets as big as possible. Our stress buckets don't need to be little. They can be big, and they can be, and we can pour more into them. There are a myriad of tools out there that we can access to help those our stress buckets be as big as possible and be as resilient as possible. And like Lee said, you just got to find the right tools that work for you. But know that things will and can get better. And I think that's the most important thing. Put yourself first before you can look after each other. It's one of the things that we were taught on the mental first aid training. It was first, before you go into check on somebody else, you need to check on yourself and make sure you're in the best place possible to be able to offer the best care possible. And I think again, that's just reinforcing what everyone else has been saying.
Cheers, Robert. And as you can see on screen, we've got Rugby League Cares isn't 24/7, so there is other trusted supports if you need urgent help or you know somebody who needs help. And as you can see, you've got Samaritans, you've got CALM, which is the campaign against living miserably, and the Hub of Hope, which if yourself or you know somebody else who needs to get in touch, please do, because as the whole presentation, I think if there's one key element what's come out of it is talking is strength, speaking is strength, and it will get you the help you need by not bottling them feelings up and letting your bucket overflow. It's about getting out there and speaking to people and telling them how you or somebody's feeling, which will have a positive effect on their life or your life. And we finish the presentation with enjoy the game because thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Yes, thank you.
Cheers, fellas. Thank you.
So you stay tuned to the Rugby League Cares website. There'll be a lot of resources on there on mental health and physical health fitness. So stay tuned and keep logged in with Rugby League Cares.